Hello and welcome to EduRev. My name is Harshmeet Singh. I've been teaching Indian polity and history to civil services aspirants over the past 5 years now. This is the last video in the series of video in which I am summarizing the class 6th history NCERT book for you to make sure that you form a basic understanding of our ancient history and see how the archaeologists have tried to interpret information that is available in our yesteryears, and they have tried to make sense of how life has emerged or how life has changed from that time till now. I've already done 5 videos in this series. I hope you have gone through all of them. The sixth video, that is this one, is a continuation of those videos. In the sixth video, we will begin with something called Prashasti. Now, what is Prashasti? See, in Hindi, if you try to translate Prashasti, that means a written account appreciating someone, a written account of someone that appreciates or that tells about their achievements and tells about how big a life they had. It was a very common practice at that time. Us time pe most of the kings used to have their own prashasti. It's kind of an introduction or kind of a life summary character sketch written for the king by their poets so that people coming after them, सालों बाद भी कोई पढ़ेगा तो they can understand अच्छा ये ऐसे थे. So many prashastis were written. Now, for example, if you work for a king, मैं एक king के लिए काम करता हूँ, and I know if I please him, अगर मैं उनको खुश कर दूंगा, they will give me good things in return, and I am writing his prashasti. So obviously, I will write big things about him, right? I will write things like, अरे ये सबसे ताकतवर आदमी थे. He used to see and fire used to emerge. From his one hand, he used to bend everything. He used to break tanks with his hand. So usually prashastis, when you see, these are over the top accounts. Some of them are true, but many of these information in prashasti are over the top accounts because only when the king was happy, they used to give in return presents and gold coins, etc. to the poet. So they used to write over the top accounts. Now, on the other hand, prashastis also are a very important source of information about many rulers of that time. For example, Samudragupta of the Gupta dynasty, one of the most famous kings of India, one of the most famous kings of the Gupta time. About him, we get to know a lot from his Prashasti. His Prashasti was written by Hari Sena, who was his court poet. It was written on the Ashokan pillar at Allahabad. The Allahabad Ashokan pillar is very, very important because multiple rulers have written on the same pillar. Because it is very, very strong and it is at a very significant position. The inscription is written in Sanskrit and it is a Prashasti of Samudragupta. Prashastis are also composed for many other rulers such as Gautami Putra Shri Satkarni. About him we studied in the last lecture that he was a Satavahana ruler. They became very, very important from the time of the Gupta rulers, and every well-known ruler wanted a Prashasti for his or her. Let's go back to Prashasti of Samudragupta. As I said, it used to be in glowing terms about the king. It said that Samudragupta was a warrior, a king. He used to win in battles. He was also a great poet, and he was in fact equal to the gods themselves. Apart from this, it also said that the rulers of Dakshinpad, that means the Satavahanas, they surrendered to Samudragupta after being defeated, and then they were allowed to rule again. In fact, Assam, coastal Bengal, Nepal, many other Sanghs in the northwest, they gave gifts to Samudragupta and they attended his court because all of them were afraid of it. The rulers of the outlying areas, that is the descendants of the Kushanas, means the people who came from outside, rulers of Sri Lanka, all of them offered in marriage their daughters to Samudragupta. Now, archaeologists don't know which of this is correct, which of this is not correct. But as I said, mainly, usually Prashastis were written in very glowing terms, and many of the times they had information which was not even true, but they wanted to praise their rulers. This is a real photo of Allahabad pillar inscription, as I said, in which Ashoka also gave his messages. Samudragupta also wrote on the same pillar in which Prashasti of Samudragupta is written. Another ruler famous after the Guptas was Harshvardhana. His book was called Harshcharitra. After the Gupta rule ended, it was Harshvardhana who now became a very famous ruler. He ruled about 1400 years ago, and his court poet was Ban Bhat. Now, it is important to remember court poets of these rulers. Ban Bhat wrote his biography called Harshcharitra in Sanskrit. This gives us information about Harsha, his family, and how he became king. Zhuangzang, who came from China during the time of Harsha, also gave a detailed account. Now, also remember, Huanzang is the same person which you write as Huanzang. So, these are the same people. He came at the time of Harsha and he wrote a lot about how Harsha was ruling, and we get a lot of information about Harsha from his writings. Harsha was not the eldest son of his father but became the king of Thanesar, that is in today's Haryana, when both his father and his elder brother were killed. His brother-in-law was ruler of Kannauj. He was also killed by the ruler of Bengal. His name was Shashank. So Shashank, ruler of Bengal, killed his brother-in-law, that is Jija. Then Harsha took the responsibility and he took over the kingdom of Kannauj and led an army against the ruler of Bengal. That is when at a very, very young age he became the ruler. He was successful in the east and conquered Magad and Bengal, but was not really successful at other places. He tried to cross Narmada river to go into Deccan, but he was stopped by a ruler of the Chalukyan dynasty called Pulakeshin II. So there are enough records available to prove that Pulakeshin II stopped Harsha from going towards the south part of India. This is again a very important map that will help you understand the areas in which Harsha was ruling. So this maroon area is the Harsha's empire. This is the Chalukya dynasty. This is where there was Pulakeshin II who stopped Harsha from going towards the south. This was Thanesar. It is in today's Haryana where he lived. Now, apart from Samudragupta, there were many other Prashastis found in different dynasties. Prashastis were also found for Pallavas, for Chalukyas and Pulakeshin also. Now, Pallavas and Chalukyas were very, very famous dynasties of South India during this period. The kingdom of Pallavas mainly was centered around their very famous capital called Kanchipuram. Kanchipuram was very famous for the art and architecture of the Pallavas. Pallavas, in fact, were the dynasty that have set to give new heights and encouragement to the Dravidian style of temple architecture. Dravidian style of temple architecture, and most of the amazing temples that you see in South India, all of that designing was started with the Pallavas. Apart from that, Chalukyas were ruling about an area around the Raichur Doab. Now, Doab is a word that you will see very often. Doab kya hota hai? Doab is area between two rivers. So, दो या तीन rivers के बीच में कोई area है, that is called Doab. Now, Doabs are extremely important, and you will see many dynasties over the years fighting for these areas called the Doabs. ऐसा क्यों था? Doabs were some of the most fertile areas because these were areas between multiple rivers. So, इसीलिए they were very, very rich in fertility, and every dynasty wanted कि भाई Doab हमारे under हो so that they can have great agriculture. Greater the agriculture, greater would be the taxes, greater would be their income. Raichur Doab was the area between Krishna and the Tungabhadra river. Chalukyans had the capital at Aihole, which was also a very important trading center. Pallavas or Chalukyas, they used to attack each other and they used to want each other's land. They also attacked their capital cities. Chalukyas का जो सबसे famous ruler था, he was Pulakeshin II, which we studied about. And Pulakeshin II was the one who defeated Harsha and stopped Harsha from coming towards the south. Pulakeshin की प्रशस्ति लिखी है रवि कीर्ति ने. Ravi Kirti was a court poet of Pulakeshin. Pulakeshin got kingdom from his uncle as per the Prashasti. Ravi Kirti also said that Pulakeshin had many expeditions in west and in east, and he checked the advance of Harsha. So Harshvardhan के बारे में Pulakeshin की प्रशस्ति में भी लिखा है, और हर्षवर्धन का एडवांस चेक किया. हर्षवर्धन वाज नॉट अलाउड टू गो टू साउथ, ये हर्षवर्धन के खुद के रिकॉर्ड्स में भी लिखा है. Ultimately, both the Pallavas and the Chalukyas were removed, and new dynasties came in the form of Rashtrakutas and the Cholas, about which you will study later on. Now, how were these kingdoms administered? As we know, these were big kingdoms, and they spent a lot of money. इनकी खुद की आर्मी थी. They had a navy, they built temples, so they needed a lot of money. The biggest source of revenue जो ज़्यादातर revenue आता था, that was land revenue. लैंड रेवेन्यू सबसे ज़्यादा आता था. Kings adopted a number of steps to win the support of men who were powerful, ताकि kings को उनसे support मिल सकता था in war, in politics, so that when powerful people are on your side, kings were assured कि उनके against कोई भी there would not be any mutiny. Many important positions were made hereditary. कई सारी positions को hereditary बना दिया गया था. For example, Hari Sena was also given the position of Mahadandanayak, that is Chief Judicial Officer, just like his father. At many times, one person held many positions. एक इंसान को कई सारी positions भी दे दी जाती थी, so that they become or they remain loyal to the king. For example, there was Nagar Shreshti or the chief banker or the merchant. Then there was Sarthav. Sarthava was a leader of the merchants. And then there was Pratham Kulika, that is a chief craftsman. These type of positions were appointed by the king and many of them were hereditary. इसमें से कई hereditary pass on होती थी from one generation to the other generation. The kings had a large army, well organized. They had many elephants, chariots, cavalry, foot soldiers. अब इतने सारे लोग होंगे तो obviously खर्चा तो हो गई. So now they had to be given money. Now it was difficult to give them cash in the form of gold every single time. So what the rulers used to do, instead of paying them regular salary, they were given grant of land. उनको ज़मीन दे दी जाती थी कि this land now belongs to you. You can give this land to someone, take rent from the people living on those lands, या आप आगे किराए पे दे दो या whatever you want. You can collect revenue from this land. अब इससे अभी short term में तो ये चीज़ ठीक है that you don't have to give salary to your soldiers, you just give them land. But in the long run, this was not good. Why? Because in the long run, so much land was given to the military rulers कि king के पास खुद का land ही नहीं बचा था. So in the short term, it was fine. The king did not have to give money or gold or revenue to the army. But in the long run, it was not a good decision because king himself did not have the money. Now in South India, there are a number of assemblies that were made. Assemblies means different groups of people, especially in the Pallava kingdom. There were different types of agency. For example, Sabha. Sabha means assembly of Brahmin land owners where only Brahmins used to live. They had different subcommittees to work for different things. Irrigation की अलग subcommittee थी, agriculture operation for making road, etc. Just like a government. Then there was another assembly, इसका नाम था Ur. Ur was a village assembly where landowners were not Brahmins. So जहाँ landowners Brahmins होते थे, जिस गांव में उनकी लोगों की assembly या पंचायत को आता था सभा, where the people were non-Brahmins, they were called Ur. Then there is another term called Nagaram. Nagaram was the organization of the merchants. So the merchants came together to form their own association. These merchant assemblies were controlled by rich and powerful landowners and the merchant, which is very, very obvious, and they took control of all the trade. There were also common people. अब common people के बारे में कई लोगों से हमें कई चीज़ों जानने को मिलता. For example, Kalidas, very famous poet of that time. Kalidas was during the Gupta Empire. He wrote a number of plays. Famously, Kalidas के plays में बहुत interesting चीज़ देखने को मिलती है. क्या? The characters who were kings and Brahmins, जो characters उनकी play में kings और Brahmins थे, उनके जो dialogue थे, they were in Sanskrit. And the characters of women and other men below the king, वो प्राकृत बोलते थे, मतलब common man's language. He famously wrote Abhigyan Shakuntalam, which is a story between the king Dushyant and a young lady called Shakuntala. Very, very famous book, even regarded one of the best plays ever written till now. Chinese pilgrim Fajian, he also noticed that people in that time were treated as untouchable. So there was an untouchable class also. In fact, they were so badly treated that they were not allowed to enter town or market. एक piece of wood basically रखा जाता था अगर कोई enter कर जाता था कोई untouchable में से piece of wood was kept to keep that person separate. इतना ज़्यादा untouchability थी. जब भी कोई ऐसी piece of wood की sound आती थी तो पता चलता था अच्छे से untouchables आ रहे हैं and you have to go away from them. So there was untouchability in that time. Accounts have also been given by buildings, paintings and books of that time. Iron Pillar बहुत ज़्यादा famous है in Mehrauli. It's about I don't know, 5 kilometers from the place where I live. So Mehrauli in Delhi has a very famous iron pillar. It's commendable. Why is it famous? Because it is rust free even today. 1500 साल हो गए, still it does not rust. It is made up of iron, 7.2 meters high. I'll show you a photo. The pillar says it was made by a king called Chandra of the Gupta dynasty, but it's still not clear which exact king was it, because there were multiple kings by the name of Chandra in the Gupta dynasty. It has not rusted over these years. There are many other buildings made up of bricks and stones. For example, stupas. Stupa means mount. So stupas were basically built by Buddhists. In the center of the stupa, relics of the Buddha were kept. Relics means something in his remembrance. And then over this, a structure was made called the stupa. So a small box was kept at the heart or the center of the stupa. They usually contain body remains of Buddha or his followers, remains such as bones, teeth, ashes, etc., or coins or stones associated with them. This basket was called or relic. This box was called a relic casket, covered with the earth. So earth के अंदर रखा जाता था और उसके ऊपर this structure was made called the stupa. Dome-like structure and was covered with stone slabs. As this is the Mehrauli iron pillar. This is in Mehrauli. Still rust free. You can visit. It's in the Qutub Minar complex. Now, I'll also show you the photo of stupa. Stupa also is a very, very important topic, and it has been asked multiple times in the prelims and the mains examination as well. When you see the photo of stupa, you will see when you visit a stupa, you can take a round around the stupa. This is called Pradukshin Path. It is surrounded by railings. The entrance path was through the gateways, and the devotees could take round in the clockwise direction to show their devotion. These railings were decorated with many sculptures, Jatak stories mainly. Earliest Hindu temples were also made during this time. Vishnu, Shiv, Durga, these were worshipped in सबके temples बनाए गए थे. The most important part of temple in North India was Garbhagriha. Garbhagriha was the area where the chief deity was kept. So जो main मूर्ति थी वो गर्भगृह में रखी जाती थी. Over Garbhagriha there was a shikhar of, so for example, if this is the Garbhagriha, there was a deity kept. Over this, a tall structure was made called the shikhar. Priests performed religious rituals in the Garbhagriha only. Often as the Bhitargaon or tower or the shikhar was built at the top of the Garbhagriha. Most temples also had a place called mandap. Mandap मतलब वो hall जहाँ पे people could assemble. यहाँ पे आरती वगैरह के लिए this was called mandap. This is a photo of a stupa. You can see this easily. It has markings of what are the different parts of stupa. This is important for your examination. You can take a screenshot of this and try to remember this. Now, stupas and temples were huge and they could not be built by common people. It required a lot of money. That is why usually traders, merchants, kings, queens, they were the ones who used to spend money on building these. The carvings on the stones, the drawings, the sculptures, all of that needed money. So that is why only when the kings or the rulers wanted, they could build these kind of structures. When devotees came to visit temples or the stupas, they also brought gifts to decorate the building. For example, the famous Sanchi stupa has a very beautiful gateway. This was donated or this was given by Association of Ivory Workers. Ivory workers ने सांची स्तूपा में decorated gateway पूरा दिया था. Decorations were also given by merchants, farmers. They also gave many perfumes and many other things were given as gifts, and they were inscribed on pillars, railings, and the walls of the stupas as well as the temples. Apart from this, we also have amazing paintings of that time, mainly in the Ajanta caves, where many paintings were kept. These were caves that were carved out in the form of monasteries for the Buddhist monks. Many of them were decorated with paintings. The colors are visible even today. These colors are made up of plants as well as minerals. We don't know who made these paintings, but these are some of the paintings. And as you can see, the colors are visible even today after more than 1500 years. Then many other books were written during that time. Also, just to remind you, many questions are asked from the books of that time in the prelims examination, so it is important. There were many epics written in Tamil language. For example, Silapadikaram was composed by a poet called Ilango. It is a very famous story about a merchant called Kovalam who lived in Pohar or Kaveri Patnam. He fell in love with a lady working in the court called Madhavi, although he had a wife called Kannagi. So Kovalan and Kannagi were married, but Kovalan fell in love with Madhavi. Now later on, Kovlar and Kannagi left Pohar and went to Madurai, where he was accused by the court jeweler of the Pandya king that he had stolen something, and thus the king sentenced Kovalam to death. Kannagi still loved him, and he and she now took anger, and she was very angry because of this injustice, and she destroyed the entire city of Madurai to have revenge of her husband. This is the story of Silapadikaram written by Elango. Why I am telling you the story is there have been times when a story of the book has been asked in one or two sentences in the prelims examination. Another Tamil epic, The Money Make Lie, it was written by Satyanar. It is a continuation of the story. It describes the story of Kovalam and Madhavi's daughter. Then there are other writers such as Kalidas who wrote in Sanskrit. Many other Hindu religious stories were written in the same time, such as the Puranas. Puran, as you know, means old. So Purans contain stories about gods, goddesses like Vishnu, Durga, Shiv, Parvati, etc. They contain details of how they were worshipped and also about the creation of God and about the kings. They were written in simple Sanskrit and they could be heard by anyone, women, Shudras, etc. While the Vedas were only to be heard by the Brahmins, the Puranas were available for everyone to hear and to recite. Two Sanskrit epics, Mahabharata, Ramayana, were also written during this time. Mahabharata, as you know, is about the war fought between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, who were the cousins. This was a war to gain control of their capital, Hastinapur. Other types of books were also written. Both Puranas and Mahabharata were believed to be compiled by Vyas. Bhagavad Gita is included as a part of Mahabharata. Ramayana was also written, as all of you know, it's about Lord Ram, the Prince of Kosal, who came back from the exile after defeating Ravan and returned to Ayodhya, the capital of Kosal. Valmiki is considered as an author of Sanskrit version of the original Ramayana. Many non-religious scientific books were also written. For example, Aryabhat, very famous mathematician and astronomer, he wrote in Sanskrit a book called Aryabhatyam. He also stated that day and night were caused by rotation of Earth on its axis. Earlier, it was believed that a demon, एक राक्षस आ जाता है तो रात हो जाती है, वो चला जाता है, दिन हो जाता है. But Aryabhat was the one who described Earth is rotating. Because of its rotation, day and night are formed. Although it seems that the sun is rising and setting, but it's the Earth that is rotating and revolving. He also developed scientific explanation for eclipses also, and found a way of calculating the circumference of a circle, which is almost as accurate as we follow today's formula. Now I have two questions for you. The first question is in front of you. Take about 10-15 seconds to answer this. There are three statements. First, the most important part of temple was mandap. Second, most temples had a space called Garbhagriha where people could assemble. Third, a tower called Shikhar was built on top of the temple. Out of these, if you can understand this clearly, 1 and 2 are incorrect. They have interchange. The most important part of the temple was Garbhagriha, where the chief deity was kept. Mandap was the hall where people could assemble. Third statement is correct, so the answer here is B. Question number 2. Which of these is not correct about the Puranas? Now remember, when a question says not correct, do pay attention to it. They were recited in temples by priests. Then they contain stories about creation of the world and kings. They were written in simple Sanskrit, could be heard by everybody. Women and Shudras who were not allowed to study Vedas, they could not even listen to the Puranas. Which of these is not correct? D is not correct. We have just studied women and Shudras were allowed to listen to the Puranas, but the other parts are correct. They were not allowed to listen to Vedas, but to Puranas they could listen and they could recite. Thank you so much for watching the video. EduRev Infinity, as you know, is an excellent platform prepared by UPSC experts, having more than 10,000 questions for your practice and ready to download notes for your preparation. Thank you so much.